Good morning. Today I want to discuss the new Chief of Defence Staff, 4-star General Anil Chauhan, and what we should realistically expect from him. It is well known that he retired as a 3-star officer in May 2021. Sometimes in September 2021, he wrote 2 articles and sent to the Force magazine for publication, which we accepted. Within days, he sent an email and called me up personally to say that he would like to withdraw both the articles, and we agreed. It was very obvious to me that he has been given some assurance of a placement in the government. Then came the news that Chauhan would be the military advisor to the National Security Council Secretariat NSCS, which, as we know, is headed by Ajit Doval. And his predecessor, Lieutenant General Vinod Khandare, had been shifted to become the military advisor to the Defence Minister Rajnath Singh. Now, all this shifting and placements could not have happened without the personal intervention of the then CDS General Bipin Rawat, with whom Chauhan shared a lot in common. For example, both Bipin Rawat and Chauhan, they are counter-terror expert. They both come from the same regiment, Gurkha Rifles. They both hail from the same place, Garhwal. Ajit Doval also comes from Garhwal, and most important, when in service, Anil Chauhan had shown a clear proclivity for ideological alignment with the ruling party. For example, when he was the Director General Military Operation in 2019 and the Balakot air attacks happened before the general election of 2019, a controversy erupted. And the controversy was about the September 2016 so-called surgical strikes. The Congress party said that similar strikes had been done when they were in power, and at least 6 such strikes had happened. So the arbiter to decide this was obviously the DGMO. So Chauhan gave his opinion that after seeing the records of the military operations branch, the September 26 surgical strikes were the first of its kind, and no surgical strikes had been done before that. This settled the matter, but obviously this was not correct what he said. Because in the first place, what was done in September 2016 were not surgical strikes at all. They were low level, shallow, coordinated counter-terror operations across the line of control, of which the government took the ownership. In fact, during the UPA regime, raids had been done, which is far more aggressive, far more dangerous than doing counter-terror operation, but the matter rested here. Then when he became the Eastern Army Commander, he again in uniform made political statements. He praised the government, the Modi government, saying that you need a Modi government to take hard decisions for the national security of the country, like the decision of the abrogation of the 376 article from Jammu and Kashmir and the Citizen Amendment Act, which actually affected Northeast the most, and Northeast happened to be under the jurisdiction of Chauhan at that time as the Eastern Army Commander. So it was very clear to Bipin Rawat that he was the right man to be brought into the government. Now fast forward to June 2022, when the government introduced the Agnipath scheme. Now in June 2022, the government had already lost the CDS, their favorite CDS, Bipin Rawat, who had died in an accident, air accident in December 21, and it became very difficult for Ajit Doval as a non-military man to convince the people, though he came on certain channels to convince about the Agnipath scheme and that it will not be withdrawn. The biggest protests came from the veterans, from the retired community, who said, and rightly so, that the Agnipath scheme will shake the foundation of the unit, spirit de corps and camaraderie. Even the Nepali government said that they did not agree with or did not favor the Agnipath scheme, and they will not be sending their volunteers to join the Gurkha Rifles of the Indian Army. This is the time in June itself, please recall, that it was very clear to Ajit Doval that Chauhan had to be brought in as the CDS, as a bridge, something like what Bipin Rawat was doing between the government and the military and the veterans. So in June 2022, the rules were amended. The Army, Air Force, Navy Act was amended to increase the ambit for the deep selection of the CDS to bring in also the retired officers into it. Now it was a matter of time when he would be brought in. So finally it happened. And if you see the government press release which says that Anil Chauhan has been appointed as the CDS, it also mentions that he will also be the Secretary to the Government of India because he will be heading the Department of Military Affairs. Now, by putting this line, what they have done is, though technically Chauhan is junior to the three service chiefs because they have held the 4-star rank much before they became 4-star than Chauhan, but because he is now the Secretary to the Government of India, he comes in the policy making loop of the Government of India. In terms of precedence, in terms of stature, he becomes higher than the other three services, the chiefs. More than that, why this has been put there is that he will head the Department of Military Affairs is because it is in this department that the Agnipath scheme was incubated. And this is, in my assessment, the primary task now of the CDS to deliver. The CDS will be required to sell this Agnipath scheme favorably to the veterans, to the three services. Three services, in any case, the chiefs will not say no. In fact, they are quite happy about it, as well as a Gurkha rifle officer to travel to Nepal and assuage their apprehensions on this Agnipath scheme. This is, in my assessment, his primary task, and on this he will be assessed by Ajit Doval, and hence the government release also mentions about that he is the CDS till further orders. Now, as a CDS, we know that Bipin Rawat he wore a couple of hats. But before I get there, there is one question I digress here to answer that. This question though was raised by the television commentator Karan Thapar, but many people have asked this question that shouldn't the second CDS or the CDS post should be in rotation? After all, the first CDS was from the Army, now it should be either from the Air Force or the Navy. The answer to that is no. Under the Modi government or under the BJP government, the CDS will always be from the Army for the simple reason that the requirement is of a counter-terror expert. Recall that in October of 2014, when Prime Minister Modi addressed his first Combined Commanders Conference, he made it clear to the three military chiefs what is the primary threat that they have to fight against. And he said words to this effect that while the threat is known, which is Pakistan, the enemy is invisible, that is terrorism. So the threat always remains terrorism, and counter-terror expert you can only get from the Army. They cannot come from the Navy and the Air Force, and hence this CDS will always be with the Army. Now, let's recall when he became the CDS, Bipin Rawat. So it was said that he wore three hats. His first hat was that he was the advisor to the defense, single point advisor to the defense minister. Now we know there is already this General Khandare who is the military advisor to the defense minister. So Chauhan has nothing to do with this job. He remains the advisor to Ajit Doval. Second task, or the key task as far as Chauhan is concerned, I have already mentioned, is implementation of the Agnipath scheme as early as possible. Because the government is keen to save a lot of money, the government simply does not have the money for modernization. Now, the third thing which was most important for Bipin Rawat, in my assessment, will be of no consequence under Chauhan, and that is creating jointness amongst the three services. As far as Rawat was concerned, he was completely hung on this, that jointness is the key thing, and he had taken upon himself to create the theatre commands, basically create a joint force. And there was sufficient bad blood on this issue between the Air Force and the Navy, and the matters are Air Force and the Army, and the matter is still not resolved amongst the two, because the Air Force does not want to give away its limited assets as part of the joint force to the theatre commands. And the government has seen all this happen. In any case, government is not very keen to do that. But I will give something very different, I will explain here, which is about this theaterization and joint force and jointness. My point is, when you want to create, when you have only physical domains, the domain of air, the domain of land, and the domain of sea, you do not need jointness, because jointness is putting the cart before the horse. I will explain that in a while. Why you don't? So what you need when you have only physical domains, for example, in case of a land war, there is Army and there is Air Force. They both have their service core competencies. As far as Army is concerned, its core competency is combined arms operations, which basically means how to bring in, how to optimize, how to synergize the effect of all the elements of the army, like armor, artillery, infantry, engineers, EME. How do you bring them together into one package for optimal effect on the target? That is combined arms operations. This is their key competency. Similarly, the key competency of the Indian Air Force is about speed, it's about range, it's about flexibility, it is about lethality. This is the key competency of the Air Force. And the core competency of both the services, they are based on the terrain, on climatic conditions, and on the response time. The moment you talk of jointness, that means one of the core competencies of one of the services is getting compromised, it is becoming suboptimal, and hence it is not desirable. What is desirable is, in case of only physical war domains, is coordination. And there is even no coordination between the Army and the Air Force, we have seen. And of course the Navy also, because there is no networking between them for coordination. Worse, the Air Force and the Army today still do not have the same frequencies to coordinate, radio frequencies, and they use different map grids, which is not suitable for a coordinated action. This is the state of affairs, and this is what needs to be corrected. Now, why I am saying this is because this is the truth that the three services also follow. I will explain it. It is known that the Army Chief and the Air Force Chief, and of course the Navy Chief also not so much, they all are involved in trying to resolve the huge differences which exist in the jointness, so that the theaterization can move forward. So it is fair to say that General Army Chief General Manoj Pandey, while being involved in jointness, as far as modernization is concerned, his only focus is Army. He is only focused on the combined arms operation, how to do it better, which is the correct thing for him to do. For example, just a week back, he gave a very longish interview to a television channel, General Pandey, where he spoke of that in terms of readiness, I am looking at three things. I am looking at infrastructure development, which he said that since the problem started with the PLA, we have now created habitat for 35,000 troops. We have now garages for 450 tanks, 350 artillery pieces. Then there is better road connectivity for logistics, for mobility. Then we have created more bridges. Then there is, because these are all valleys, so interconnectivity is also been created. Then he spoke of aviation, where he said that now we have strategic airlift, we have tactical airlift for faster mobilization, we have underground storage for logistics and ammunition in terms of modernization. General Pandey said that, look, we are looking at lethality, we are looking at precision, mobility of artillery and tanks. Then we are looking at ISR, so we are bringing in the drones. Then he said the infantry soldier, we want to empower him more. He should become an integrated solution by itself. Then he spoke about inducting the light combat aircraft. He spoke about the army looking for loitering munition. The point is, in his longish interview, he did not once mention jointness with the Air Force. And likewise with the Air Force and the Navy, all the three services are looking at how to improve their core competency. In other words, within themselves they fully realize, but they are unable to articulate this, that look, we do not need jointness. We simply need coordination, that's it. Now, when do you need jointness is a very relevant question then. So for that, now we have to look at the PLA, what the PLA is up to, and this is in fact the biggest challenge that today Chauhan and the government of India faces. I will come to this. My book came out, and there is a lot of talk among some commentators who say that this is all futuristic. It isn't. Why it isn't futuristic is because the PLA will fight in two ways. It will fight a informatized war. It will also prepare, and it will fight an intelligence-sized war. As far as informatized war is concerned, they were ready in 2014 with it. I will explain this. Informatized war is basically about denial of communication to the enemy and domination of communication by own side by systems destruction. Or in case of the Indian military, because it is not networked, so destruction of the command and control structures. This is what informatized war is all about. So, it was sometimes in 2012 when it was very clear to the US Pentagon that the PLA had created 3 additional war domains of cyber, outer space and electromagnetic spectrum. And they had put it in 2 structures. One structure was called the Integrated Network and Electronic Warfare, which had cyber electronic warfare and PSYOPs, and the second was the Space Systems Department. This was already existing in 2012. What this means when you say that a domain has been created, that means you have the capability to contest, to compete and to combat in that particular domain. This is the key thing. Now, because of that, the Pentagon also realized that they already had acquired a capability to close the kill chain quickly. They had operational systems, what the Americans called battlefield networks, as good as the US military had. And they could do long range targeting with guided munition, with their mortars, guns, missiles, rocket as good as the US military. And they had done sufficient miniaturization, which means lethality could be produced at long ranges. All this was accomplished in 2012, which is why there was a big thinking in the Pentagon, and then the Pentagon said that our second offset strategy of taking on the PLA or the Soviet Union, the earlier Soviet Union, which was look deep, shoot deep, kill deep, had been overtaken by the technology which had been acquired by the PLA, and hence the need for a third offset strategy. So again, I must emphasize, all this was accomplished by 2012. So on the one side, the Americans went for the third offset strategy, which was to bring in artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, the key things were in the autonomous software. They were looking at autonomous software, they were looking at autonomous machines, and they were looking at autonomous robots. Meanwhile, what the Chinese did was the PLA, what they had already accomplished, now they wanted to optimize that. So they came up with their military strategy 2014, which clearly mentioned 6 war domains: the cyberspace electromagnetic spectrum, the new ones which were created in the virtual domain, not in the physical domain. And insofar as the physical domain was concerned, the sea, the focus shifted to the undersea. That means the focus shifted to 300 meters below the surface level. And as far as air was concerned, air was divided into 2. It became air and it became near space. Near space was the altitude of 20 kilometers to 100 kilometers, where their hypersonics are now, they have created a new war domain. So all this was done in 2014. Now, when you optimize your technology, you need to create the relevant structures also, structural organizations. They were done by the 2015 military reforms. In other words, today, as far as the PLA is concerned, they are capable of a decisive war in 72 hours because of their informatized warfare capabilities. What this means is that because the Indian side does not have the war domains of cyberspace and electromagnetic spectrum, because the Indian side cannot contest, compete and combat in these, they will dominate all this, the virtual domains of outer space, of cyberspace, of electromagnetic spectrum, and deny communication in the first 48 hours to the Indian side. Without communications, how do you win a war? It is cognitive defeat. That is what it leads to. So, as far as the PLA is concerned, they are no longer looking at the physical domains or the platforms. They are looking at capabilities. So when you look at capabilities of the 6 domains, what they will do is what they call the integrated joint operations, where they will look at the best strike package, which they call the mission sets. And that is what they have already prepared for a war in case they want to go with the Indian military. So they are ready with this. Nothing is futuristic. Futuristic is their aim plus. Artificial intelligence is aim plus against their key adversary, which is the US military, by having the first mover advantage. That is the key thing. Now, here is the bottom line then. As far as the Indian military is concerned, the 3 services, because they are only in the physical domain, they have no choice. For example, the army will be focusing on the line of contact. But as far as the PLA is concerned, it will have nothing to do with the line of contact. It will look at the entire combat zone. It will look at the entire combat zone, and it will look at the war zone, which involves the whole of nation, which is about cyber. This is where the PLA will be fighting. So, the job of the CDS, when I said that when you are trying to do jointness and theaterization, it is putting the cart before the horse. Because the first thing you have to do is create capabilities, create these 3 war domains in the virtual fields of cyberspace, electromagnetic spectrum, so that you are able to contest, compete and combat in these. Only then you should be thinking of jointness. Then that jointness will optimize the whole thing like the PLA has done, and nothing short of that will happen. But here is my last point. I do not expect this to happen at all under the Modi government, for the simple reason that Chauhan has been brought in with the primary aim, as I said, to push in the Agnipath scheme, and the entire focus of the government is to create a perception of a robust defense policy. The perception has to be created, the reality does not matter. Thank you so much.